Oh, good morning. Hi. How's everyone doing? I just want to share a couple stories and talk about some of the things that I've learned about project-based learning through the lens of an architect, because I'm not trained as a traditional educator. I came to the world of education kind of through the side door. I grew up in the area. Sorry, you can kind of see that photo, but I was like 3 years old here, and this is my first maker space, and I'm wearing really awesome knee socks and sort of my first drafting table. And I'm showing this because my mom found this photo a couple months ago and showed it to me, and I realized like I kind of still do the same thing every day. Like I don't wear knee socks, but that's kind of the way that I understand the world. And so as a young girl, I grew up in Marin, and I grew up in this really beautiful house up at the very top of Mount Tamalpais, and building and making stuff and like taking apart my grandmother's rotary phone and not figuring out how to put it back together. Like that's how I came to understand the world. And I was at Maker Faire recently, and Adam Savage from, what's the show? Mythbusters, thank you. He said, humans do two things that no other species does. We tell stories and we use tools. And making and building is a way of doing both at the same time. So that's really like the theme of my childhood, is making and building and telling stories and trying to figure out how to use new tools. I discovered later in my life, in my teenage years, that architecture was this field that allowed me to do all of these things and also be a huge nerd about pretty much every subject. I was a big math nerd. I'm obsessed with math. I love math. But I'm also really interested in creativity and aesthetics and art and human behavior. And I discovered architecture when I was a junior in high school as this thing that was like a Venn diagram with architecture in the middle and all these other subjects that intersected in this one space. So I studied architecture at UC Berkeley, and then Go Bears, thank you, yes. And then went on to study more architecture at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. But long story made very short, it turns out that architecture as a practice is not really my jam. I graduated with a master's and took this job because I had $80,000 in student loan debt. I was 25 and thought like, okay, I should probably be an adult now and like have a 401k and do all these things that my parents are telling me I should do, and then just realized that I'm so not good at any of those things. I don't like having a boss. I don't work well in like a rectangular room, and I don't normally dress like this. So for all these reasons, I left the corporate world of architecture, and I wanted to get back to some of the things like the twinkle in that little girl's eye of making and of solving problems and doing things that were connected to people and like real life. Designing plumbing fixtures was not all that stimulating for me, and that's not why I fell in love with architecture in the first place. So Project H was an extension of all of those sentiments: the frustration, the hope, the optimism that architecture could be more than plumbing fixtures. So in 2008, Project H was born with little more than a 4-sentence mission statement that I scribbled on a napkin. And the H's came from just a bunch of words that as I was writing, like, what is the practice that I want to have as a creative person? All of these words kept coming up. And so I'm like, great, there's the name of my organization. It's Project H, done. And I walked into the Secretary of State's office and I filed paperwork as a nonprofit. So that was 6 years ago. And so the 3 stories that I want to tell you have happened under the structure of Project H, but they've also happened within the environment of public schools. And that's something that as an architect, I never would have thought like, okay, I'm gonna end up in a classroom with high school kids, or I'll be leading PD for 35 teachers every week. That's not anything I ever thought would be part of my job as a trained architect. But it turns out that architecture, among other amazing things, is really a form of project-based learning. And for kids, it's a way to make core subject learning really real, whether that's like the physics of how something stands up, or the cultures and customs of a society in which a building resides. So I realized like a couple years in that what we were really doing as an organization, which is teaching design and building to kids, we were also doing project-based learning. So we sort of know, everyone in this room, I'm sure, could give a really good definition of what project-based learning is. What I'm really interested in and the stories I'm going to tell are really more about the why and the how. Project-based learning to me is just sort of like an applied, real-world execution of academic concepts. And the part that's so interesting to me is why we do that and how we do it. And for me, the how is that we should and we do it with a lot of audacity. That like we should be able to do projects that surprise people and that are forward-thinking and transformative. And the why for me, and I say this having been in a classroom now with kids for 4 years, the why is really about love. That we have a love for our students have a love for certain things in their world, whether that's video games or their family or their heritage or their community. So love and audacity are the why and the how for me. So the 3 stories I'm going to tell are 3 stories of love and audacity. They're also stories of architecture and math and community, and trying to connect all those things in really beautiful ways. So the first story, there's a student of mine who I met him in 2009. His name is Karan. At the time, Project H was based in a really small town in North Carolina. If anyone's been to Berkeley County, I will buy you a, yes. Wow. Okay, we should have coffee after this. So Berkeley County is in the northeastern part of North Carolina. It's extremely rural, kind of like caught between Raleigh and the coast and nothing much in between. And so I was working there with a really awesome superintendent who invited us to come and like transform his district using design. So I met Karan. This is Karan. He's a super shy kid. The first 2 weeks of class, he did not say a single word. And I was like, did I do something to make him mad? What's the deal here? But I had set up this class within the school district really as an experiment. And this is the first year that we taught this class is called Studio H, and it still lives on today. But this is the first, Karan was in the first group of students I ever had within this structure of Studio H. And the goal of Studio H was for kids like Karan who are maybe stuck in a pattern of apathy or just feeling like school's not doing a whole lot for me, to use design and building to excite them about their community and about their learning. So I met Karan. He was 16 years old at the time. He's a really, really smart kid, super shy, and just kind of a little bit lost in like what he wanted to do and how he was going to get there. So the very first project that we assigned to our students in this class, there were only 13 of them, was to design the craziest chicken coop you could possibly design. So normally, on the first day I said, someone draw me a chicken coop, and I'm guessing you can all imagine what I got. It was a box with a roof like this. I'm like, okay, so now what is the craziest possible chicken coop that you can design? And you have my word that we will build it. So what you see, you can kind of see on the floor there's a strip of wood. And what I had done with Karan and all the other students is to say, okay, we don't really know where to start. Many of you have never really seen what crazy, beautiful conceptual architecture looks like. So I assigned each one of them what is referred to in architectural education as a precedent study. And so this student's precedent study, Karan's precedent study, was Buckminster Fuller. So he was looking at the geodesic dome and the Demaxian houses and trying to understand the geometry of how they worked. And so these are some models that he built. This is 4 models out of, I think he built probably 50. Just trying to understand how the geodesic dome works, and then secondarily, how he could learn lessons about geometry that could influence the design of his chicken coop. So these are the 4 models that he built. What you saw on the slide previously was the rebirth of Bucky Fuller's geometry into what would then become his chicken coop. But that thing that you saw on the floor, that strip of wood, was actually really complex. And so when Karan came to me and said, I want to build this crazy-looking chicken coop inspired by Buckminster Fuller, I was thinking 2 things. 1, I promised this kid that I would build the craziest thing that he brought to me. And 2, I have no idea how to build this. So it was like the weirdest shaped, I was completely stumped. He brought it to me in a cardboard model. And I thought, okay, I get how that works in cardboard. And I have no clue how to do that in wood and metal. So we prototyped this hinge that was like flexible but sturdy at the same time, and it was based on a 30, 60, 90 triangle to minimize waste when we cut it off on the table saw. So this is like one of 8 different versions that we were trying to figure out in order to make this chicken coop happen. So we finally figured out at least the structure of it and built this long strip, raised the roof. We had a raise the roof day. Lifted this thing into the air. It took everyone in our class to figure out how to lift it and tweak it. It's bending on these hinges, and so we're holding this thing above our heads, looking across the room at the model, and like trying to negotiate the two. Like, we have to make this look like that. This is like full body learning. Eventually, it started to take shape. We taught a little bit of structural MIG welding just purely for the structure and the skill of it. That was one of the requirements of the chicken coop. And then they used this rubberized roof paint just to weatherize it to protect the chickens from the rain. And then this is the final coop, which they named Coopus Maximus in honor of Bucky Fuller. And then this is the team that built it, and Karan's there at second on the right, and his team that he led through this whole building process. So I show this is the first part of Karan's story. This is the first thing that Karan has ever in his life built. I remember asking him during the first couple of weeks of school when he finally started talking to me, what's the last thing that you built? And he said, I don't build anything. And I said, okay, what's the last thing you made? And he said, a cup of noodles for my younger brother. So for Karan, this is like, oh my God, I can actually build, and I can build something beyond my own expectations. So working off of this momentum, we then challenged our students and said, okay, you just built architecture for chickens. What would it mean to build architecture for your community, which is a struggling town? It's a town of 1,500. It's a lot of the same stories that we hear about small towns across the country. It's very much the community in which these kids reside. And where I live too, I'm invested also. So the challenge to the students was, now let's build something for the community. And what they came up with after this long process of interviewing, need finding, going out and talking to neighbors, going to places in their own community where they'd never been before, they heard from a number of people that everyone wanted a farmer's market, which in the Bay Area, or maybe where you live, is not the most revolutionary thing. There are farmers markets everywhere. But for rural North Carolina, which is a farming community, but it's also very poor, not a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurship, and very high obesity rates, low public health, it's kind of this like amazing intersection of a lot of different solutions. So the students got really excited about it. The mayor was really excited about it, so much so that he gifted us a piece of land to build it on. The town council, the Rotary Club, it became this like, oh my gosh, this is something that everyone can get excited about regardless of the reason. Everyone had a reason to be invested in this. So we started in the same way that we did with the chicken coops, like just what's the craziest farmer's market we could possibly think of? And then let's take it down a notch from there, but let's go to the edge of the earth and then bring it back. So we went to the state farmer's market. We looked at other farmer's markets around the world, tried to understand like what are the physical requirements, and then also what are the social interactions that happen within that space. So then the students, this is Karan here, presented all of their ideas, their visual ideas, to the whole town. This is one of the town councilmen who he's presenting his Google SketchUp rendering to. And I love this photo so much because, as Gina said in my intro, this is a great example of how building and design and creativity puts people in the same space that never ever would have met ever in their lives in this small town. I'm pretty sure that Karan and this guy Jock never would have met. And yet they're standing there looking at and talking about something that they're both really, really excited about. So we took all this feedback back to the studio. We revamped all of our ideas. We smushed some together and tore some apart and threw some away and found some new ones. And through this process of design, which is messy and chaotic, but also really rigorous and methodical, we ended up with one design that the whole class felt that they had an ownership in. And what it looked like was this, which is this is not a fancy building, but is very much inspired by some of the local agricultural structures that you see really only in Berkeley County. I haven't seen anywhere else this one type of building, which peanuts are one of the biggest crops in Berkeley County, and there are these structures where there's 8 different bays, and they pull these trailers full of peanuts into them. But it's this really specific geometry and a really specific pitch to the roof, and I've never seen them anywhere else. And so some of our students said, like, that's something that's unique to us. Let's build our own building that's inspired by that. So this has the same sort of rhythm. There's 8 bays, but instead of peanut trailers, each one of those bays is for a farmer's market vendor. It also has this really high roof to allow for ventilation, and that front facade becomes like a billboard to the town. It's like we've started referring to this as vernacular sublime. It's familiar but elevated. So this is what we came up with, and this is what was approved by the building inspector and by the town, and everyone was really excited about it. And then we realized, this is at the end of the school year, we realized, okay, we have this great model, we have construction documents, and now we have $60,000 in grant funding, 3 months, and a construction crew of teenagers, and we actually have to build this thing. Like, this is where my architectural education stopped. You do this, you put it on the wall, some random professional architects come in and critique it, and you get a grade and you're done. And so I'm like, oh my God, now we have to build that. Like, I knew that in my heart, but at the end of the school year, I was like, oh man, I'm so tired. It's 110 degrees outside and we have to build this thing. And our crew is 16 years old and they want to be on jet skis. So these are like the physical limitations of what I do and what we had to do and what we signed up for. So we hit the construction site. This is like 2 days after school got out. And we dug holes for 2 weeks straight for the foundation footers. And we poured like 3 trucks full of concrete. We had prefabricated these trusses in our classroom because, fun fact about North Carolina labor law, if you are under the age of 18, you can't use a power tool on a construction site. So our whole building had to be analog, hand-built on site, except for the one kid, Stevie, who turned 18 on like July 2nd. So he became our chop saw guy. But other than that, I mean, we had all of this was prefabricated in our shop where kids can use power tools under the umbrella of the school. So, yet another fun constraint that we had to deal with. But that's what design is. That's what makes it really fun. So we brought all these pieces to the site, reassembled them, hoisted them into the air. The kids, the students, this was a really awesome day for me. This was July 3rd, and so the site that we had just to the left over here is one of the public parks. And so they were setting up the fireworks in the public park on July 3rd, and the whole town was like prepping for this big party. So as we're like hoisting these things into the air, and our students are standing there with their hard hats, and I'm operating this piece of machinery that I did not know how to operate a day before. And these people are coming to the site and thinking like, what the heck is going on here? There's 16-year-olds who are black, white, male, female, wearing hard hats, raising this building that looks crazy, and there's a woman operating. I mean, it was just like a spectacle. But it was such a magical moment because the looks on my students' faces were of complete awe and pride. Like, that was a model on my desk not too long ago. So this is coming together. It's rising up out of the ground, laying the deck joists here, and back to like carpentry 101. If I ask you for a piece at 95 3/8, don't bring me one at 95 1/4 because I'm going to make you do it again. So back to like precision and craft and all of the real world constraints of building. And then putting up the siding. And so the one thing I did not mention though is that we didn't just have to build this structure, we had to start a farmer's market, like as an entity, as an enterprise. Because you can't just build a structure and there's nothing to go in it. So we had to start the enterprise and partner with the town to set up a management structure. And so as we're building the structure, we had also started the farmer's market in a temporary location, which is in that same public park, just adjacent to the site. And so over the course of the summer, as we're building, people were coming to the temporary farmer's market on like card tables. It was a joke, but everyone knew, like, we're here while this is being built and we're moving in. So by the time we finished the building, the grand opening was the move-in for the vendors. So this is just like a few days before the grand opening, and then this is the final structure once it was finished. And so when the building was done, the students had just gone back to school. We were a few weeks over our budgeted time frame. But we did the opening ceremony, and all the vendors from the farmers market moved in for the first time. It was this really amazing, and it was a great community moment just to have people in the same space that some of them had never met, and they're there selling cakes and living the dream of becoming a baker, or whatever their stories were. They were all being housed in this student-built structure. And so you can kind of see there's cars parked on the back side of the building. And so I mention this because at the grand opening, we did not give people instructions on how to enter, set up, how to use the building. We just wanted to present it and say, okay, go. And so Stevie, the kid who turned 18 and was the chop saw guy, he was the one that made this design decision. I remember this so clearly. So we had to build this in a flood zone, a hurricane zone, and so because it's in a flood zone, we had to build the deck height at 3 feet above base flood elevation level, which is basically hip height. So we're thinking, like, that kind of sucks, because then you have to ramp up to it, it's more expensive, et cetera. So Stevie, in this moment, says, well, that's not the worst thing, because hip height is the same height as a truck bed, so it's also a loading dock. And I was like, that is so brilliant. I was so frustrated 5 seconds ago, and you're so smart. So, so we built this with the backside as the loading dock, and on this opening ceremony day, people just pulled up. We didn't tell them anything. And they pulled their trucks to the backside, backed in, and dropped their truck bed, and it was like within 2 inches of the deck, loaded their kale or whatever it was into their booth, and away we go. And Stevie's watching all of this, and he's another one who's very quiet. He's an observer. So he's standing back watching all of this, and I said to him later, I'm like, that's a deliberate design decision that you made. And he's like, yeah, and it worked. So again, just like validation that these kids have ideas, and they're brilliant, and they work, and they matter. So this is just some of the kids at the opening ceremony. So here's Karan in the front in his striped shirt. And that quote at the very beginning that I put up, that was something he said to the mayor when he grabbed the microphone from the mayor during the opening ceremony. And the mayor had given them the key to the city, the second key to the city that's ever been given out, which is an actual key. I did not know this. It's like a big brass key. So Karan took the mic and he said, I want to say I'm really proud of this building. I speak on behalf of my fellow students, and I want to come back here someday and tell my kids that I built this. And that was the most amazing moment for me as a builder and as an educator, that for this kid who didn't talk for the first 2 weeks of class, that he had done something that he was really proud of, that was meaningful in his community, and that he saw a future and how that future related to what he was doing in that moment. So that was a really, really I was a mess. I was crying for like 2 days straight. But Karan also influenced a lot of other students in his school. So the next year, we had 27 more students, and we gave them the same challenge, like, what should we build? What should we build for our community? And I expected them to say, let's build a house, let's build an animal shelter, let's build a something, I don't know. And they said, you know what, we love the farmers market so much, and we're so mad that we didn't get to be a part of it, that we want to build off of that. So they built these 2 really cool little roadside farm stands, because Berkeley County, being so sparsely populated, has little outlying towns of like 400 to 600 people, where it's a 35-minute drive to get to the farmers market, the hub farmers market that we built. So they built these just to create more of a networked farmers market community. So this is one, and then this is the other. Interestingly, so we did Battle of the Sexes. So this was the boys' design, which is very curvaceous. And then, and this was the girls' design. They're like, we're making boxes, lots of them. So I just think that's kind of funny. So more proof that creativity breeds creativity, and empathy breeds empathy. So this was the second class of students that I had. So that's the story of Karan. The second story is that we ran this program, Studio H, in rural North Carolina for 2 years, and for a whole host of reasons we ended up leaving, and we brought the program to a public charter school here in the Bay Area called Realm. It's in Berkeley. It's the only public charter school in Berkeley. And we joined the school in its second year, so it was very nascent, and we got to be a big part of building the sort of creative mission of this school. Because it's a new school, there are a lot of facilities and resources that it was lacking, and we saw that as a great opportunity for our program, that we get to be a part of building those things. And one of the things that they were missing is a school library. And so just this past year, which is our second year at Realm, we expanded to the 8th grade. So now we have 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th graders in this program. Next year we'll have 6th through 12th graders. So this is the project that our 8th grade students came up with, that we gave them the same challenge. What do you want to build for your community? And they said, we don't have a school library, so we want to build one. And I'm like, great, that's perfect, let's do it. So it turns out that, I'd kind of gotten comfortable around high school kids. It turns out I'm super scared of 8th graders. They're like a whole different, I don't know how many of you teach 8th grade, or yeah, kudos. It's a different bunch, and they're like at the top of the food chain. They think they're super capable, and then they are, but then there's all these other things like Instagram and fondling each other that get in the way. So I'm like, I don't know how I feel about giving you a chop saw right now, given all those things. So, but any group of kids that comes to me and says, I want to build a school library for my school community, we're for damn sure building a school library. I'm not going to say no to that. So this was a big learning curve for me, just moving into a different age group and teaching basic skills, like not how to use a hammer, like how to hold a hammer. We'll start with that. How to hold a ruler and not want to smack the kid that you have a crush on next to you. Really, really basic skills. And then once those skills are there, then you can have conversations about design and scale and structures and behavior and how you create space. So this is just like Carpentry 101. And then thinking about what a library is. Most school libraries are places of reference where you go and you're like, okay, I'm looking for that book, Amelia Bedelia. Let me find the Dewey Decimal Code and take it, and then I leave. And so our students said, that's fine, but we really also want a place to relax and explore and discover things that we didn't know existed. So that's a very different kind of library, a place for exploration and of the unknown, that you go in and you don't know what you're looking for necessarily. So this is the new branch of the Berkeley Public Library, where we went to do the same kind of research we did with the farmers markets. Like, what is a library? Nitty-gritty stuff, like what's the average number of books per linear foot? What's the average height of shelving? What's the distance between shelves? What does circulation feel like? And then what does all that mean for our library? Do we want to follow that, or do we want to throw it all out and start over? So it turns out they wanted to throw it all out and start over. So what they came up with was they wanted, instead of designing one space, they wanted to design a building block, basically, like a brick, a cinder block, a module, a building module, that they could create this entire space out of. And as 108 kids, that made a lot of sense, because how do you make sure that 108 kids are invested in a space if there's only one design? Their answer was, we build a building block, and then we build whatever we want out of that building block. So what they came up with was this really cool X-shaped unit, which you'll see in the next slide. But we also, knowing that we were going to have to make hundreds or thousands of these things, we had to do that with some regularity. So this is the first project where we used any kind of like high-tech fabrication. This is a 5-axis CNC router, which we borrowed from actually the CEO of Autodesk, Carl Bass. He has a shop a couple blocks from the school, and I befriended him and strong-armed him into letting me use his equipment. So we used the CNC router to cut about 800 of these X-shaped blocks. And it looks really simple. It's just two interlocking pieces that go like this. But there's two versions. One has a convex face and one has a concave face. And they lap together with this lap joint, and then they're connected with these bolts. So this is one. This is about 22, maybe. So the challenge, they've designed this block, and then, okay, what can we do with this block? What are all the possibilities? Well, you can make shelving, obviously. You can make a bench-shelf combo. You can make tables and desks. and so much more. And then looking at the space plan, there is a room that was empty that was allocated as the library space, and so this is what the students are working within. So what is the space plan? Like, what are the things we have to think about circulation-wise? Should there be a circulation desk? Should there be a quiet area, a public area? And then representing that in scale drawings so that we can present our ideas in a cohesive way. So then we go to actually build and fund this project, and I mention this because Project H funds all of the material costs for all of our projects. And so this is not a cheap project to do, including the $30,000 cost of the books. So we put up a Kickstarter campaign, and I spent a lot of time crafting the story and the brand with our students. And we funded this entire project through Kickstarter. We had 607 backers, and we raised $78,000 in 30 days. And this was partly me, but also a lot of our students' efforts, and saying to the whole world, we had funders from Japan and Finland, and they just watched the ticker and said, oh, John from Finland just gave us $50. Who is he? That's so awesome. Let's email him. So for them to be able to tell the story and then know that there are people around the world that saw the value in what they were doing just made our space, that school space, bigger than just 600 square feet. So then we went to actually build this thing. There's 800 X's. That's a limitation. What do you do with 800 X's? Is it only shelving? Is it floating modules? This is all up to them. So this is one of the shelving units. We invited the 6th and 7th graders into the space just to open a book and stop, drop, and read and experience it as a place of learning and literacy. And then this is the soft opening, because we don't have books in it yet. We're getting them this summer. You can kind of see one of the tables. There's a circulation desk at the front. This was this really cool semicircular table that they designed. So we're getting books this summer, and it'll open to the whole school community in the fall. So this whole project happened in 4 months. And because 108 8th graders said we want to build our school library, and I said, of course you can. So just a really beautiful example of taking project-based learning, applying it to something that matters, and then bringing in all of these core subject learnings to make it meaningful and long-lasting. So the last story I'm going to tell is sort of my great love. And the other program, so Studio H is one half of our organization. The other half is called Camp H, and it's a program that I just started last year for 9 to 12-year-old girls, really because I remember being that age, and I remember being 10 years old so vividly and having this weird moment of awareness of my own life. I'm of an age where I can physically do things. I was competing, I was playing really competitive soccer, I was still making stuff, and yet I was still a little girl. I didn't have the Instagram fondling hormones running around like 8th graders do yet. I was still a little girl, and yet I had all these big ideas, I want to do all these things, but I'm still a little girl. I remember thinking that when I was 10 years old. So I started this camp, Camp H, to sort of catch young girls at that moment and say, you are capable, you are still a child, but that doesn't mean you can't learn how to weld or do all of these amazing things that adults do and that creative professionals do. So Camp H started last summer. It's a summer camp and an after-school program. And last summer we had 48 girls. The registration sold out in 3 days. And I just wanted to give them a space to create things in multiple media with tools that they don't ordinarily have access to. So this is the first week we worked in wood, and the challenge was to create a birdhouse inspired by Piet Mondrian's artwork. So everything had to be at right angles. We used this cedar fence board, and they could create whatever form they wanted, but within certain design constraints. So here's Azusa. She's using a brad nailer that's bigger than her torso. Eliza learning how to use a really awesome chop saw. I felt like it was so important to give them access to tools that, this is the same chop saw you would see on any job site. It's not pink. It's a really awesome chop saw, and why can't Eliza use it? So this is Kaya and her birdhouse, and then all of the birdhouses that they built, which I was so sad when they took them home. I wanted to keep all of them. And then welding, so I've been welding for about 12 years now, and I remember the first time I welded it. There's something superhuman about it. Like it just like defies logic in some way. And you know, sparks are flying and you're fusing metal, and it's just like some superhero stuff. And so for a girl, this is Joanne. She's 9 years old. She's from Japan. Her English is a little bit choppy, and she's, I swear to God, a better welder than I am now. So I wanted specifically with welding to put a welder in a 10-year-old girl's hand. I was also just curious if they could do it. And turns out they can, and they do it really well. But there is this fear. There's a lot of fear around picking up something that's going to throw sparks all over your body. And so this is sort of like the opus of Camp H, is learning how to weld and learning how to do it well. So this is Leslie. It's just a basic, like a flux core MIG welder. So you just plug it in. There's no gas. It's pretty forgiving. And then once you know the skill, asking yourself, well, now what can I do with it? What can I do with a hard skill that expresses my voice and says something to my community? So the challenge that I gave them with these pieces of steel was to create a symbol using 4 pieces of steel that would symbolize basically a family crest. Something that symbolized your family name meaning, your family history, your name, and the meaning of your name and who you are. So they each had 4 pieces. That was their limitation. And you can kind of see they're cut on 45-degree angles. So these pieces were either parallelograms or trapezoids. And so visually and mathematically, they had to figure out, okay, well, if I put 2 45-degree angles this way, it makes a right angle. If I put them together this way, it makes a flat line. And what are all the different geometric ways these things can come together? So they researched their family names, played with the geometries of their family crest symbol, welded it, grinded it, and painted it. So this is my absolute favorite one. It's kind of hard to see, but this is Ultraviolet. That's her name. And the symbol that she created was these 2 pieces that were parallel with 2 pieces at a 45-degree angle connecting them. So she got up on the last day, and this is the presentation to the parents, and she said, my name is Ultraviolet, which is a form of invisible light. And my last name, her last name was hyphenated, my last name means dark and tailor, like a seamstress, a tailor. She said, so this is my symbol, which represents my light side and my dark side being seamlessly stitched together. And I was like, what? I mean, she's 9 years old, and I mean, that's just ridiculous. So I'm like, that's better than anything I ever heard in architecture school. And then here's some of the other ones. This one on the lower left, this little girl's name was Erica Noel. Erica means regal, and Noel means Christmas or birthday. So she created this form inspired by a birthday candle, and it's called the Confetti Kingdom. So they also had to come up with a name. So I loved working with these girls and bridging the gap between the really hard skills, like trade skills, and something more poetic and soft and personal. And then the second part of Camp H is just putting girls in situations where no one would expect them to be, like changing oil or a flat tire on your parents' car. Or we built a geodesic dome in 45 minutes just because we felt like it. We went to Carl Bass's shop. This is the same guy that cut all those X pieces on his CNC router. I mean, that's like a $400,000 machine and the CEO of Autodesk, and they're just like chilling with him and learning what CNC stands for. And no one would expect them to be in that space. This is an underwater robotics company that's also in West Berkeley, and they got to go and visit and tinker with their own underwater robot. So obviously I see myself in a lot of these girls, but I also feel like it's this really unique age group and moment in their lives where we can call it STEM-based learning, we can call it design thinking, whatever, but there's something about building as a girl of this age and connecting those things to who you are as a person and also the things that you're learning in school that I think is just really magical and is audacious and is loving and is all the reasons why I do what I do. So just in closing, these are 3 stories. This is all in the past 5 years. These things have unfolded. And I'm learning more and more every day that it's so weird just telling someone I'm an architect, because I don't think that's really what I am anymore, but I'm also not trained as a teacher, so I'm not really sure what I do. But I do know that in this context, in talking about doing meaningful projects with kids, the things that matter to me are the love and the audacity of them. And so I ask my students I give my students this challenge pretty much when we start any project, and I'm going to give the same challenge to you. And so the first thing is, what and who do you love? And I ask my students this all the time, and they're like, oh my God, stop, we get it. But really, like, so much of what we do as educators, or what our students are doing as learners, what we're doing as leaders, it's really easy to disconnect from who we are as individual people and just say, okay, I'm a teacher and I have these standards and whatever. But really, like, that's all that matters. What do you believe in and what do you love, and then how do you give that gift to your students? So what and who do you love? And then secondly, what is the craziest idea? What is the thing that would just like shock the world if you were to do it? And then the asterisk being, is it really that crazy? And then the ultimate challenge I give to my students is just go and do those things. Like, it's really as simple as that. What do you love? What's your crazy idea? Put those things together and go and do them and have a ton of fun doing it. So that's as close to a mission statement for my organization as I have. And I try to stick to those things when I'm in the classroom, too, that there are a lot of things that I love to do. There are a lot of things that my students love to do. And when we share that space in a project-based learning setting, it gives us permission to do all the things that maybe we wouldn't otherwise have the space to do. So I'm putting my email up here for two reasons. One, because it saves paper on business cards, but also because I've started doing this whenever I give talks, and I'm inviting every single one of you to come to my program at Realm in Berkeley and to learn how to weld also. I can teach you in 35 minutes. So if you want to come and learn how to weld, or just come by and see what we do, drop me a note. And I want to just say thank you to everyone everyone that's here, and also to the Buck Institute, because going to architecture school and then like stumbling into this world of education, it's been difficult for me to negotiate those two things. And so I think the Buck Institute is just such an amazing resource for all of us, and even for someone like me that went to architecture school. And I think we're all here for the same reasons and in the interest of kids. And so I'm just excited to be part of the conversation, and thank you so much for listening.